Dan Whitaker was moments from death, burning with fever as he was wheeled into surgery, his body shutting down from a ruptured appendix. But just as the lights dimmed and the world slipped away, something impossible happened. Time froze. The operating room vanished. And standing beside him, clear as day, was a man he instantly knew was Jesus. What followed was a journey beyond life, into a city not of this world, and a message that would change everything.
My name is Dan Whitaker. I'm 53 years old, live in Modesto, California, and work as a superintendent for a construction company. I've been in the building business most of my life. It started as a summer job in college and just never stopped. I climbed the ladder from laborer to foreman, then foreman to superintendent. These days, I'm usually juggling 25 to 30 houses at different stages of construction. It's fast-paced, deadline-driven, and honestly, a little crazy most of the time. I leave the house early, get home late, and somewhere in between, I'm just trying to keep the machine running. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Laura. We've got 4 kids, all grown now, and a handful of grandkids who have brought more joy than I ever expected. Back when our kids were young, we were always on the go. Soccer games, football practice, school plays, late-night homework. I coached Little League for nearly 2 decades. Somewhere along the way, life became a calendar full of appointments and not enough space in between. If I had to describe myself before everything happened, I'd say I was a doer. I was the guy who handled things. I fixed what needed fixing, paid the bills, showed up when it counted. I didn't spend much time sitting still. I didn't like to. I always had something to build, something to solve. That kept my mind off things I didn't know how to deal with. Feelings, worries, big questions about life and what it's all about. Spiritually, I was somewhere in the middle. I believed in God. I went to church when it was convenient, especially around the holidays. I said grace at dinners sometimes. I wasn't against faith, I just didn't think much about it. Not deeply. My relationship with God, if you can even call it that, was more like a background noise I got used to. I figured I was a decent guy, worked hard, loved my family. That should count for something, right? But the truth is I felt disconnected. Not just from God, but from myself. Life was moving fast, and I was always just trying to keep up. I didn't notice sunsets. I didn't stop to take in the quiet. I thought rest was laziness. I kept pushing, even when I was exhausted. That's just what men like me do. Or so I thought. I also carried a lot of stress. Managing job sites, handling workers, meeting timelines, it wore on me. I didn't talk about it much. Just carried it in my chest, in my shoulders, in the shortness of my breath at the end of the day. My blood pressure was high, but I told myself I was fine. I kept ignoring the signs because slowing down felt like weakness. Looking back now, I can see I was surviving more than living. I wasn't miserable, but I was numb in ways I didn't recognize. I had love around me, my wife, my kids, but I wasn't really present. Not fully. My life was loud, full, and busy, but it was also missing something. I just didn't know what it was. Not yet. It started during a trip down to San Diego. My oldest son, Jacob, was getting married that weekend. The whole family was excited, our first kid to tie the knot. We decided to turn the wedding weekend into a little vacation. Laura and I, plus our 2 younger boys, drove down a couple days early to enjoy the beach and relax a bit before the big day. We got it on a Wednesday afternoon. The hotel was right across from a big public park, and as soon as we unloaded the bags, the boys grabbed their baseball gloves and bats. They were itching to play some home run derby. I wasn't feeling great, a little off, but I figured it was just a long drive. They begged me to come out and play, so I joined them. We were out there for over an hour, laughing, swinging, chasing balls. It felt good to run around, even if my stomach felt a little tight. That night, though, things changed. I started feeling sick, nauseous, like a bad flu was coming on. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would fix it. By Thursday, the stomach pain had worsened. It wasn't sharp, more like a deep ache, and I kept brushing it off. I told myself it was probably something I ate or a stomach bug. But by the afternoon, I had chills, and the fever was creeping up. I tried to keep it together. Friday came around, rehearsal dinner night, and I was sweating through my shirt and barely eating. I joked with guests that I was coming down with something, but I wasn't going to miss out on the food I paid for. I still didn't want to admit something serious might be going on. I just figured I'd push through and deal with it after the wedding. Saturday, the wedding day, I barely slept the night before. I was running a high fever, couldn't get comfortable, and my stomach felt like it was twisting. I looked in the mirror that morning and hardly recognized myself. Pale, sunken eyes, weak. But I wasn't going to ruin Jacob's day. I pushed through, made it through the ceremony, the pictures, even the toasts. By the time the reception ended, I was done. I leaned over to Laura and said, "I have to go to the hospital. Something's really wrong." She didn't hesitate. We said quick goodbyes and drove straight to the ER. At the hospital, a nurse checked my temperature, 104.3. My shirt was soaked through. When they pressed on my stomach, it didn't hurt in the usual way. But then they tapped the bottom of my foot, and the pain shot through my abdomen like a lightning bolt. That's when the nurse said, "I'm calling the surgeon." It hit me then. This wasn't a stomach bug. This wasn't the flu. Something inside me had gone seriously wrong, and I could feel it like my body was waving a white flag. Walking into that ER felt like crossing a line I didn't want to admit was there. I was exhausted, soaked in sweat, and trying to hold it together, but my body was giving out. The waiting room was full, but when they took my vitals and saw my fever, they moved quickly. A nurse took me straight back, sat me down on the exam table, and started asking questions. I remember trying to answer, but even talking felt like work. My head was foggy. I was hot and cold at the same time, and my stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Another nurse came in and started pressing around my abdomen. It was sore, but not in the way I expected. I kept telling them, "I don't think it's my appendix. It doesn't hurt in one spot like they say it should." She didn't say much, just nodded and then did something I'll never forget. She tapped the bottom of my feet gently at first. When she hit my left foot, I nearly jumped off the table. The pain that shot through my stomach was unreal. She looked at me and said, "That's referred pain from your appendix. We need to get the surgeon in here." That's when the tone shifted. They started moving faster. Blood work was drawn. I had informed my arm before I even realized it. The surgeon came in, serious but calm. He told me my white blood cell count was through the roof. "Your appendix most likely ruptured," he said. "If that happened a few days ago, we need to get in there immediately." Hearing that, ruptured immediately, everything kind of stopped in my mind. I looked over at Laura. She was holding my hand, trying to stay brave, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I think that's when it really hit me. This wasn't just a bad flu or a rough couple of days. This was life or death. As they wheeled me down the hallway to the operating room, I felt scared in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid. I tried to make peace with whatever was coming, but my thoughts were a mess. Memories, regrets, prayers, flashes of my family. All I could do was hold on and hope I'd wake up again. When I turned my head and saw him, I froze. He wasn't just a figure. He was there. Real. Physical. Not a vision or a ghost. He stood like a man, but carried something I can't put into words. Everything else had disappeared. The machines, the lights, the people. All of it was gone. It was just me and him. And the silence around us wasn't empty. It was full, like it was holding something deep and powerful. I didn't recognize him the way you'd recognize someone from a picture. It wasn't about his face or his clothes. It was something deeper. But I knew, without a doubt, that it was Jesus. He had dark skin, darker than I'd expected. Not the pale figure I'd seen in church paintings growing up. His hair was brown and wavy, shoulder length, and his eyes were this deep, greenish-blue color, the kind you don't forget. When he looked into mine, it was like he saw straight through me. Not in a judging way, but like he knew me completely. Every thought, every failure, every bit of who I was. And he loved me anyway. He wore a simple white robe. Nothing flashy. No glowing halo or booming voice. But he didn't need any of that. His presence alone made the air feel different. Everything around us seemed to hum with peace. Not the kind of peace where things are just quiet, but the kind where you feel like you're finally home after a long, exhausting trip. My first reaction was confusion. I kept asking myself, is this really happening? I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Not because I was scared, but because I was overwhelmed. There was this flood of emotion, relief, love, sadness, hope, all at once. I felt small like a child, but safe. More safe than I've ever felt in my life. Jesus didn't say much at first. He just looked at me with those eyes, and everything I needed to know was already in them. I could feel it, his love. It wasn't like human love. It wasn't earned or based on anything I'd done. It just was pure, strong, and unshakable. It wrapped around me, filled me up, and broke me open at the same time. Then he held out his hand. It was calm, slow, gentle. No force, no pressure. Just an invitation. Like he was asking, "Do you trust me?" Not with words, but with everything in him. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and took his hand. And the moment I did, everything shifted again. I didn't feel the cold of the hospital anymore. I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel tired or afraid. I felt alive, completely, deeply alive in a way I'd never known was possible. It was like waking up from a long, gray sleep into a world full of color and warmth. That's when I knew, wherever I was going, it wasn't Earth. And I wasn't dreaming. I was being shown something real, something holy, something I had no words for yet, but I was about to see with my own eyes. The second I took his hand, everything changed. It wasn't like walking or floating. It was instant. One moment I was standing in that still, empty space with Jesus, and the next I was somewhere entirely different. It was like stepping through an invisible curtain into a place more real than anything I've ever known. I found myself standing on a hill. The ground beneath my feet was soft, covered in the most beautiful grass I'd ever seen. It was a deep green, almost bluish, and every blade looked perfectly placed. I was barefoot, still in a hospital gown, but I didn't feel cold. In fact, the air was warm, not hot, just the right kind of warmth that wraps around you and makes you feel held. There was no wind, but everything felt alive. The grass, the light, even the air had a kind of presence to it. Everything was brighter, but not in a blinding way. It was like the light came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It wasn't just something I saw. It was something I felt. It touched every part of me. I looked up, and the sky wasn't like anything I'd seen on Earth. It had layers of color, soft gold, pink, light blue, all mixing together like a painting still moving. The colors pulsed gently, like the whole sky was breathing. At first, I just stood there frozen. I didn't know what to say or do. I felt small, but not in a bad way. More like I was standing in front of something greater than myself, something perfect. I wasn't afraid anymore. All the fear I'd carried, about dying, about what would happen next, was gone. It had no place here. The feeling that came over me was awe, pure and deep. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I knew this wasn't my imagination. This place was too detailed, too full of meaning. My senses were sharper than ever. I could hear and feel things in ways I never had. It was like my soul had eyes of its own. And somehow, I knew I wasn't alone. I was being led somewhere. This was just the beginning. As my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I began to take in more of what was around me. I was still standing on that hill, surrounded by that soft, perfect grass. But now, off in the distance, I could see something beyond the hills, something that pulled at me without saying a word. A city, or at least the rooftops of one. The city sat down in a wide valley, covered in a gentle white mist that shimmered like it was lit from within. I could only see the tops of buildings at first, domes, towers, and tall, narrow spires that looked like they belonged to cathedrals or temples. The largest dome was gold, gleaming in the light, round and smooth like a crown. Around it were smaller domes, also glowing softly, like the entire city was breathing with light. The buildings weren't crammed together. They seemed to float in space, each one set apart, yet perfectly placed, as if someone had arranged them with infinite care. The layout didn't follow any grid or pattern I recognized, but felt right. Natural, peaceful. Everything flowed, curved, and shimmered in the light. There were no straight lines, no hard edges. It all looked soft, almost like it was alive. The light there wasn't like sunlight. It came from everywhere. The sky above changed colors the higher I looked. Warm oranges near the horizon, soft pinks and golds blending into purples and blues. At the very top, it was a deep, rich blue that made me feel like I could fall into it and never reach the bottom. There were flowers around the hill, too, tiny ones barely above the grass. Pinks, purples, yellows, soft whites. They moved like they were dancing, but there was no wind. It was like they were responding to something I couldn't hear. And then I realized I could hear something. A sound, but not like music. More like a hum, a vibration, something deep and steady that seemed to come from the ground, the sky, the light, everything. It wasn't loud, but I felt in my chest like a song made for my soul. Above the city, beams of light shot across the sky. They looked like glowing ribbons, smooth and bright, bending as they moved. One of them passed right over me and burst into 1,000 smaller lights when it reached the trees on the far side of the valley. Those trees, tall pines, rich green, perfectly shaped, lined the mountain behind the city. And beyond them, the sky lit up with the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. It wasn't fading like sunsets on Earth. It was alive. The colors changed slowly, like a living painting, glowing from within. I stood there in complete awe. I wasn't just looking at beauty. I was inside it. I could feel the love of it, like the entire place was built on love. No pain, no rush, no fear. Just peace, joy, and wonder that reached deeper than anything I'd ever felt. And somehow, I knew this was home. Even though I'd never seen it before, my soul recognized it. I didn't need directions. I didn't have questions. I just wanted to be part of it, to walk down into that valley and explore everything. But I also knew something else. I hadn't seen the best of it yet. There was more waiting. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the beauty of what I was seeing, Jesus stepped beside me again. I didn't hear his footsteps. He was just suddenly there, quiet and calm, like he'd never left my side. He didn't speak with his mouth, but I could hear him clearly, not in my ears, but inside me. Every word was felt more than heard. It was like my heart understood him before my mind even caught up. He said, "I want to answer your prayer." At first, I didn't know what he meant. I hadn't said anything. But then, like a memory coming back, I remember being a kid, maybe 7 or 8, sitting in church after my grandfather's funeral. I'd listened to the priest talk about heaven, about a place with no more pain, no sadness, just peace and joy. I remember looking at the stained glass windows and thinking, God, I want to see that someday. It was a child's prayer, simple and honest. I had forgotten all about it, but he hadn't. In that moment, I felt so deeply known. Not just seen known, every piece of my life, every moment I thought had been overlooked or wasted, every buried hope and silent prayer. It was all remembered. Nothing was lost. Nothing had gone unheard. Jesus didn't give me a long speech. He didn't explain a universe or tell me secrets. But what he gave me was even more powerful, understanding. A quiet knowing that life isn't about perfection. It's about connection. With him, with others, with creation. He showed me that we were made out of love, to live in love. Everything else, work, success, stress, none of that really matters in the end. I felt no judgment. I felt no guilt. Just love, stronger than anything I'd ever felt. It was the kind of love that heals you just by being near it. And it changed something in me. A weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted off. That's when I realized I hadn't just been shown heaven. I had been invited into something much bigger, something that was always there, just waiting for me to notice. The return happened fast. 1 second, I was standing on that hill with Jesus, surrounded by peace and beauty I didn't want to leave. The next, it was like I got yanked backward through a tunnel. Everything, the city, the light, the warmth, vanished in a flash. I didn't see it fade. It was just gone. And in its place came noise, chaos, cold. I opened my eyes to bright lights overhead and people in masks leaning over me. The sounds rushed in, machines beeping, voices shouting, the rustle of scrubs moving around. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck. My chest hurt. My mouth was dry as sand. I couldn't move or speak at first. My mind was trying to catch up to what just happened. A doctor leaned close and asked, "Do you know your name?" My lips cracked as I tried to speak, but they were so dry it hurt to move them. I finally got out, "Dan." He nodded. "Good. You know where you are." I didn't answer right away. My thoughts were tangled. For a moment, I was still on that hill. Still with Jesus. They had started coming back. San Diego, the wedding, the hospital. Ventura, I whispered. Okay, he said, turning to the others in the room. He's back. That's when I realized something had gone wrong in surgery. I had died. They had brought me back. I turned my head and saw the crash cart next to the table. One of the paddles was resting on the side, still connected by its wires. Someone was cleaning up. That image stuck in my mind. I had been gone, and they'd used that thing to shock me back. Everything felt heavy, my body, my mind, my heart. But underneath it all was a strange kind of peace. Like I knew, even in the middle of all the pain and confusion, that I had seen something real. I had been somewhere real. And somehow, I knew I hadn't come back on my own. I'd been sent back, for a reason I didn't understand yet. But one thing was already clear. I would never be the same. The hours after surgery were a blur. I was hooked up to monitors, still groggy, drifting in and out of sleep. But the moment I was awake enough to think clearly, the memory of what I had seen came rushing back. It hit me hard, like I had just stepped out a dream that wasn't a dream. I wanted to tell someone to make sense of it out loud, but the moment I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Just tears. Laura came to see me a few hours later. She stood by my bed, smiled gently, and asked, "How are you feeling?" I looked at her, tried to speak, and broke down. I couldn't hold it in. I wasn't crying from pain or fear. I was crying because I had seen something so beautiful, so overwhelming, that I didn't have words for it. She looked concerned, thinking I was upset or scared, but I just shook my head. "You wouldn't believe what happened," I finally whispered. Then I started crying again. It took me 3 days before I could tell her the whole story without falling apart. Every time I tried, I'd get partway through, I saw him. I was on a hill. There was a city, and my throat would close up. The emotions were too big. There was a lump in my chest I couldn't talk through. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even confused. I was just overwhelmed. Completely. When I finally got the words out, Laura sat beside me, holding my hand, and tears filled her eyes too. She didn't question it. She didn't doubt me. She just listened. And that meant everything. Even then, I didn't fully understand what I had experienced. Was it heaven? Was I really dead? Why was I allowed to see it? Why did I come back? The questions kept swirling. I wanted answers, but I also didn't want to explain it away. Deep down, I knew it was real. More real than anything I'd ever felt. But putting it into words was like trying to explain color to someone who's only seen black and white. It wasn't a story I could just tell. It was something I had to carry. Coming home was different this time. I didn't walk back into my old life the same man. Everything looked the same. My house, my job, my routines, but something inside me had shifted. Deeply. I couldn't go back to rushing through the days like I used to. I didn't want to. One of the first changes was how I noticed things. The little things. A beam of sunlight coming through the window. The sound of birds in the morning. My grandkids' laughter in the backyard. These were things I'd always been around but never really saw. Now, they stopped me in my tracks. I'd stand in the middle of the yard and just watch the wind move through the trees. I started taking walks with no destination, just to feel the air and listen. I began praying, not out of habit or duty, but because I wanted to talk to God. I knew He was listening. I knew He was near. My faith wasn't a box I checked anymore. It was real, alive. I didn't just believe in God. I knew Him. I had seen Him. I had held His hand. That changed how I treated people, too. I became softer, slower to anger, quicker to forgive. I started asking people real questions, actually listening to their answers. I didn't want to miss the moments that mattered anymore. At work, I stopped obsessing over deadlines. I still did my job, but I didn't let it consume me. I found peace in doing my best and leaving the rest in God's hands. I was done letting stress own me. I began reading the Bible again, not just to study it, but to understand the heart of the one I met on that hill. I journaled. I sat in silence. Sometimes I cried for no reason at all, just because I felt full. Full of something good, something bigger than me. Time feels different now. I'm not in a hurry anymore. I know every day I have is a gift, not a given. I know I was sent back for a reason. I may not fully know what that is yet, but I'm here. And that's enough. My life isn't perfect now, but it's rooted, and it's real. I've thought a lot about why I was sent back. Why, after seeing what I saw and feeling the kind of peace, I didn't just stay. The only answer that makes sense is this: I wasn't done yet. There were people I needed to love better, moments I hadn't lived fully, grandchildren I hadn't met, lessons I still needed to learn and share. If you're reading this, here's what I want you to know. God is real. Not in some far-off, unreachable way. He's close. He knows you completely. He hears your prayers, even the quiet ones you've long forgotten. And he loves you more deeply than you can understand. You don't have to earn it. You just have to be open to it. Life moves fast, and it's easy to get lost in a rush. I know. I lived that way for years. But we weren't made to race from one task to the next. We were made to notice, to feel, to love. Slow down. Look your kids in the eyes. Listen when someone's talking to you. Step outside and take in a sunset like it's the first time you've ever seen one. That's where God shows up, in the stillness, in the beauty, in the everyday. Since that day in the hospital, I've experienced blessings I can't put into numbers. I've held newborn grandbabies in my arms. I watched my kids grow into kind, steady people. I've shared my story with strangers who became friends. And most of all, I've lived each day with a sense of purpose. I may not know all the reasons why I'm still here, but I wake up grateful. I wake up ready to love. Someday, I know I'll go back to that hill. I'll see Jesus again. I'll walk into that city I only glimpsed. And when I do, I know it'll feel like coming home. But not yet. There's still life to live. Still people to hug. Still skies to watch and prayers to whisper and hands to hold. I've been given more time, and I don't want to waste it. So here I am, doing the only thing I know to do, living slow, loving deep, and telling the truth about what I saw. Heaven is real, and so is the love that brought me back.